Hi, everyone. My name's Andre Greenwalt. I'm one of the Deputy Directors in Cabinet Affairs, and you're not going to hear from me today, but I'm just going to welcome our first panel up to the stage. We've got a great panel lined up for you. It's going to be moderated by John Fernandez, who is the Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Economic Development. He, as you know, oversees EDA and is charged with leading the federal economic development agenda by promoting innovation and competitiveness, preparing American regions for growth and success in the global economy. He'll be joined by three great panelists today. We have Frank Calzanetti, who's a professor of geography and the Vice President for Research Development at University of Toledo and Director of the University Clean Energy Alliance in Ohio. You'll be hearing more about his work in a little bit from him directly. We have Joyce Ferris, who is the founder and managing partner of Blue Hill Partners. And finally, we have William Trey Taylor, who is the co-founder and president of Verdant Power. So with that, I will welcome our panelists up to the stage and look forward to a good discussion. Thanks very much.
Good morning. Thank you for your willingness to participate in this discussion today, and that's really, I think, our overall goal is to hear a little bit from our panels, but really to get much more interaction and engagement with all of you so we can continue the kind of dialogue we need. As Secretary said, you know, there's clearly an opportunity to link energy with job creation and to drive our economy, and certainly to do that, we need the partnerships between the public and private sector to help make sure that we're all moving in the right direction. We've got a great panel today that really represents a range of the kinds of participants we need to really move this whole commercialization to job creation and change that we're looking for. I'm not going to spend a lot of time with opening comments other than to say that you heard from the Secretary about some of the work that the Department of Commerce is engaged in, particularly on the international front, as well as some of our domestic activities. The Economic Development Administration, many of you may or may not have ever heard of our work. We're focused much more on building competitive regions and working with public-private partnerships, universities, and others to build the kind of ecosystem we need at that street level to support an innovation agenda. We've been engaged in all parts of the country. I've been on the road quite a bit since my appointment. And in many places throughout the country, some of the emerging clusters that we've focused on are really being driven by the clean tech and renewable energy space. Just this Monday, I was in Fort Collins, Colorado, some terrific activity going on around creating a whole zero-emission district. They're doing some terrific work around experimenting on smart grid technology and bringing into that multiple sources of renewable energy to test systems to make sure that we know the best way to have an efficient grid to handle multiple sources of renewable energy. There's terrific work going on, like I said, all over the country. And we're happy to be a part of that. We're also heavily engaged with the ERIC, the Energy Regional Innovation Cluster. That's a really unprecedented effort of the federal government and a real testament to President Obama's desire to change how we do business in Washington. And it's driving these interagency collaborations. So you have 7 different federal agencies working to build up a regional innovation cluster around energy efficient building design materials. And that's a pretty exciting project. And it's, I think, frankly, unprecedented in terms of the level of interagency work. And so as we go forward, that'll be a model that will apply to other areas of regional innovation cluster development. At this time, I will go ahead and hand it off to our panelists. You heard a little bit about who they are. I may add a little bit more to that. And then after we introduce all 3 panelists, we'll let them make their, they're going to make their opening comments. And we'll go ahead and have all three make their comments before we engage in the Q&A. So I know you're going to have some good questions and suggestions and input, but we'll wait till we get through all three of the panel members before we get into that kind of interaction. You know, Dr. Calzanetti, as was mentioned, he's with the University of Toledo, Vice President of Research and Development. He's responsible for their research initiatives, driving their research development planning, tech transfer, and commercialization efforts. The university has a clean and alternative energy incubator that he's charged with leading as well. Joyce Ferris is a founding member of managing partner of Blue Hill Partners. She has over 24 years of experience investing in green technology businesses. She also has extensive experience in management and development of green tech projects. Unique set of skills, from demonstrated leadership with hands-on transactions, as well as management experience in the sector. Her projects have included a pretty wide range of green tech initiatives, from energy efficiency, biomass, agricultural waste-fired energy projects, waste and coal-fired power plants, geothermal, hydroelectric projects. So it's quite the portfolio. And then Mr. Taylor is a co-founder and president of Verdant Power, and he directs their marketing and new business development efforts. He's been in this business for over 30 years as well, managing with management, development, marketing, communications, wide range of experiences. I'm real interested in hearing about Verdant Power as well, because they're in the whole wave business, and we're seeing a lot of interest in that in our work as well. So with that, let me go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Calzanetti. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fernandez. In recent decades, many states and cities have worked to revitalize their economies, particularly in regions such as the Midwestern part of the United States. And the state of Ohio is no exception to this. And we are working to develop an economy to support rapidly growing industries, particularly in the clean tech area, that really are grounded in science and engineering, and also very closely tied to our research universities. The University of Toledo has placed regional economic development and community engagement as one of our top priorities in our mission. This is strongly endorsed by our state government leaders, and with the support of federal programs, such as through the Economic Development Administration and the National Science Foundation, and with state funding, we have been able to contribute to a transformation of our region as a center in the nation's clean energy economy, particularly around solar energy. Toledo is still known as the Glass City. It was once a center for inventions in the glass industry. It was driven by the energy of talented entrepreneurs and inventors. Toledo brought forth many inventions in the glass industry over the last century. Solar energy, particularly thin film photovoltaics, builds upon Toledo's glass industry history as early entrepreneurs moved into solar energy as an opportunity to sell more glass. One of the first entrepreneurs to develop solar energy company was Harold McMaster. McMaster, with his partners Norm Nitschke and Frank Larimore, formed Glass Tech Solar in 1984 to produce solar cells by coating glass with thin layers of chemicals. As McMaster and his colleagues advanced their technology, they sought out the assistance from the University of Toledo. Together, they competed and won awards from the state of Ohio's Edison program, and they established laboratories within the University of Toledo. In 1999, investors came in and renamed this company as First Solar, and most of you know about that company. In 2001, the University of Toledo made a decision to place solar energy research as a top institutional priority by placing additional positions, supporting new laboratories, and working to create business and community leaders in this area. This story illustrates the value of universities in supporting industry development and the importance of state funding for research that leads toward commercialization. The state of Ohio has taken steps to promote technology-based economic development with a special role for the universities to be change agents in their region. Ohio Third Frontier is a $2.3 billion program that began in 2002 to support research that leads toward commercialization, entrepreneurship, and incubation of activities. The newly created University System of Ohio calls for each university to create research centers of excellence that support regional economic development and other needs. The University of Toledo has received a Center of Excellence designation from Governor Strickland in the area of advanced renewable energy and the environment. Toledo's leaders understand that research and development, when translated into innovation with entrepreneurship, cluster development, can move a region into developing leading positions in growing markets. We understand the important role of university research as a primary source of discoveries, talent, and opportunities that can support innovation-based economies. Our university has focused its attention in areas where it has particular faculty strength that supplement regional assets that are also likely to emerge as important to our global economy. Entrepreneurship is needed to transition discoveries into the marketplace. Toledo, as I mentioned, has a history of entrepreneurship in glass, which continues today with contemporary solar energy entrepreneurs. Research shows that knowledge is still highly localized and grows through various mechanisms of knowledge transfer. A clustering of sources of innovation, research universities, government laboratories, and industrial R&D labs, along with entrepreneurs, business enterprises, government organizations, and agencies, help to provide a region with leadership in technological areas that drive competitive advantage and workforce development around the cluster's needs. The National Science Foundation was early in understanding the importance that universities play in stimulating innovation in their region, particularly through their Partnership for Innovation program. The University of Toledo, for instance, was successful in receiving a $600,000 NSF Partnership for Innovation Award in 2002 to create the Northwest Ohio Partnership on Alternative Energy Systems. This project, a successful university-industry partnership, allowed us to seed new research projects, open our clean and alternative energy incubator, and establish new partnerships with industry and others. We continue to strengthen our partnership with business, the state of Ohio, and economic development partners. Right now, we are seeking more federal funding available to support these activities, including a $1 million from the EDA's I-6 Challenge. And we are seeking out support through these programs to help transform our economy. We have joined forces with Wayne State University and Detroit in our recently submitted proposal last night to form the Detroit...
I think I'm going to get lobbied.
Detroit-Toledo Partnership for Accelerating Innovative Businesses. While these programs are vital, the level of awards is really not enough to transform entire regional economies. This is why the full funding of the $12 million NSF request for innovation ecosystems is so important. In our proposal for the I-6 Challenge, we're asking for help to address problems facing many universities interested in commercializing their research, a proof of concept fund. More federal funds to help validate the commercial potential of discoveries would help strengthen the university industry innovation pipeline. We are very concerned that technology developed in Ohio and other places in the U.S. through federal and state research funding may help build strong overseas industries that sell product back to us. We who are involved in renewable energy are very concerned that we're losing our leadership to China. We appreciate that the U.S. Department of Energy understands that manufacturing leadership in solar energy is at risk unless new partnerships are formed, and so it has put forth $125 million toward the PV manufacturing initiative. The University of Toledo has joined with Dow Corning in creating the Solar Valley Research Enterprise with financial support from both the state of Michigan and the state of Ohio, and is submitting a proposal to this program to ensure that the U.S. retains leadership in crystalline silicon and in thin film photovoltaics. Our Wright Center for Photovoltaics Innovation and Commercialization, again a program developed through state funds, has provided us with a unique laboratory facilities and equipment to help us work with industry. Our Clean and Alternative Energy Incubator opened in 2005, and this facility is now a focal point for linking university research to the formation of new companies, as well as providing a place for meetings and other discussions on solar and renewable energy technologies. Since opening, we have already had a $700 million impact on Northwest Ohio's economy. We were successful in winning awards through the Economic Development Administration to invest in incubation and research park infrastructure. $2 million EDA awards were very important, but only provide the partial funding to support the infrastructure development for these facilities. The University of Toledo and many other universities have accepted the new role of economic change agents for the region. For the most part, activities to promote economic development and technology transfer to industry is supported by the universities themselves by redirecting funds from other areas. For instance, at UT, we moved our technology transfer staff to the base budget instead of funding them from royalty revenue, thus sending a message that the broader impact of our research on economic development is more important than immediate royalty revenue. We have also moved $10 million from university auxiliary accounts into a new entity, UT Innovation Enterprises, to invest in promising startups. The federal government understands the role of universities in public-private partnerships with state and with state government, and understands the difference they could make. But much more funding is needed from the national level than exists at the current programs if we're going to be transforming regional economies. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Joyce?
Thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I think it's great work to strengthen the ecosystem, which is a system I've lived in for, I think it's now over 25 years in the energy industry. I'm going to apply a perspective that's really at the next stage beyond where Frank is focused, which is companies that have, companies and technologies that have reached some level of commercialization and some of the challenges that are out there. The first point, and I'm just going to make observations and then we can go further in the Q&A, but the first point, and this is one that Secretary Locke made, is there is lots of institutional capital, billions of dollars looking to enter this space, but the capital is sitting on the sidelines, and certainly a stable policy environment is key, but even with that, there's also a desire to see lower risk, more stable returns, more predictable returns than venture, which has been one of the leading drivers into, or investment classes into the sector. There's a desire to invest in more mature companies, in growth-oriented capital, and in funding deployment of technologies and service businesses. And we see that as a huge opportunity, but it requires a level of innovation about business models and about financial fund structures in order to do that. One of the things, so putting that aside, that there's capital out there, one of the questions is how do companies move beyond, and this is, I'm operating on the assumption that companies have made it through the first stage of the valley of death and they've got commercial product, it works, it's proven, they've maybe had a pilot installation or many multiple. There's still enormous challenges in navigating the ecosystem and in selling to gigantic vertical markets, which is where what the opportunity is in this sector. The bottom line is companies need more than just investment capital to move forward. One of the biggest things companies need is help with sales. They need channels to market. They need navigation help within large vertical markets. At the same time, companies that would be customers, industrial companies, property owners in the energy efficiency and on-site renewable sector, utilities, they need help navigating how to select between emerging technologies and who's proven and who's stable. So there's a huge opportunity, as we see, to bridge holes in the ecosystem, if you will, to go, and this is after getting out of the labs in the universities. We see a tremendous opportunity to do that, and we see a place for the federal government to act as an example in this regard in a number of ways. Number one, the federal government itself as a customer is an enormous opportunity. The potential spend and the requirements for all of the federal agencies to comply with the most recent executive order around sustainability are mind-boggling, and they need, just as any other property owners that have tackled this, they need help sorting through what are the best technologies, what are the best strategies, what are the best business models, as well as how are we going to fund it. But there's an opportunity for the federal government to act as a customer in that regard, to also act as an early stage adopter, a sophisticated early adopter that, and potentially a champion of best practices and best solutions. We also see a huge opportunity beyond the federal government as a customer for the federal government, and interagency cooperation, I think, is key here in facilitating and convening all of these pieces to the puzzle: education, training, best practices, and potentially as a convener and organizer of various stakeholders, including vertical markets and integrating between technology developers on the one hand, who tend to have their head down and are focused most on getting their technology to a certain stage, and facility owners in the case of energy efficiency, which is a big sector of ours, or fleet owners for transportation or whatever, who are thinking beyond just the technology, and they're thinking about business models that work. I think those are the key points I would throw out there. There's lots more, but I'll stop at that and be ready for questions.
Great. All right, thank you very much. Trey?
My name is Trey Taylor, and as introduced, co-founder of a company called Verdant Power. We're in the marine power industry, so we're sort of a subsector, if you will, of renewable energy. Our technology can be best described as looking at wind turbines underwater. And our technologies work both vertical or horizontal axis type turbines in rivers, tidal currents, ocean currents. They could work as augmented power behind dams, lots of applications for this type of technology. Our showcase project is New York City in the East River. It is the world's first grid-connected array of tidal energy turbines. It's been successful. We are now filing for our commercial license with FERC, which we expect to get later this year, early next year. It'll be the first commercial project operating in the United States, perhaps in the world, in the sense of the tidal array turbines. We have a second project underway on the St. Lawrence River, upstate from New York, and that's in the river. So we have tidal projects and river projects underway. The potential for this power in the state of New York alone is over 1,000 megawatts. And our business partner on this project is the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. Without them, we wouldn't be where we are here today. But let me share this with you. Our total focus as a company is to design and build reliable technology. We're about to commercialize our Generation 5 technology, but already we're working on Generation 7 technology with the support of the National Renewable Energy Lab and Sandia Labs. And we look at what we're doing too as sort of our early flights. Think of what we're doing as sort of biplanes. And the technology to follow is something else to behold. And I'll give you that sort of a hint at things. But let me add what we're doing to what I call the other offshore alternative energies. And this is sort of my challenge to the United States government, or to any governments for that matter, when it comes to leading renewable energy. If you were to look at the total potential from such technologies as what we're doing, tidal currents and ocean currents, you add to that the potential of wave power, offshore wind, solar power, floating platforms off sea, salient gradient, I can go on, thermal energy. That total potential, when combined, it's equal to more than 28 times the world's current energy consumption. More than 28 times the world's current energy consumption. Now, who's going after that? Who's teaming up with the maritime industry to go after that? And the answer is nobody yet, but the opportunity is sitting there. And that's not all. So let me put this in the context of the water energy nexus. This, to me, is the world's biggest problem. Water uses energy, and energy uses water, and we're running out of both. Now, when we have reliable energy technologies working, as I mentioned that whole list, particularly of offshore or onto rivers, here's what follows in terms of innovation. Reliable, clean energy, the next thing you can do, once you have these kind of kinetic hydropower systems operating in all kinds of water fashions, is you could then integrate them with reverse osmosis systems. The mechanical power from the rotors pumps dirty or salt water through electrified membranes. We're already making electricity, you're already in dirty or salt water. So now you have potable water coming out of these systems. You could also be pumping clean water in irrigation onto fields. You could reverse the process and be pumping air into anoxic waters for aeration systems. All these are new things that could be integrated into these systems operating in water currents. But that's not all. I feel like a Peel commercial. But wait.
But there's more.
There's more. And here's what gets most interesting. If you look at the mother lode of water currents, it's the Gulf Stream, and the only place that's practical for delivering electricity would be off the coast of Miami. But further off, you may have floating hydrogen production facilities, actually extracting hydrogen for fuel cells offshore, or during off-peak hours, extracting hydrogen from systems that may be right in rivers next to cities for stationary fuel cells. But again, that's not all. I have more. There is something else going on that intrigues me no end, and that's in the production of liquid ammonia. Now, in the early days of automobiles, NH3 was used just like gasoline in combustion engines. It still could be done that way. And the way you make liquid ammonia, NH3, is by combining water or salt water with air. That liquid can be used just like gasoline in combustion engines. And when you burn ammonia, the byproduct is clean water, not CO2. Now, who in the world is producing ammonia for combustion engines? Nobody I know of, but the opportunity is there. And again, these could be offshore floating platforms in the Gulf Stream producing ammonia. And also with ammonia, you can produce fertilizer, another use. So I lay this out sort of a challenge to the government in terms of invention and innovation, but also to share another point with you. None of this would be happening without government support. We wouldn't be doing, as I mentioned before, what we're doing in New York if it wasn't for NYSERDA, the state of New York. We also got funding from the US Navy. We're also getting a lot of funding from the Canadian government for our project on the St. Lawrence River. We do have a proposal before DOE. Hopefully we'll get some funding for our New York project to commercialize that project. So here's the other challenge. The private sector will not fund technology development. Historically, it's always come from the government. So the government needs to provide what I would call a market push and pull. When I say a market push, there needs to be grants and awards given to the development of these technologies. And on the pull side, there has to be economic incentives for us who are in the marketplace developing projects to go there. The reason they're on the St. Lawrence River is not New York, it's Ontario. Ontario is providing a feed-in tariff, and it's a 40-year feed-in tariff. That's why we're there. It's why we'll go to the UK, because they have large renewable energy credits. That's why we'll go there. China has just passed legislation where they'll pay us $1.15 a kilowatt hour for our marine power. Now, as a businessman, I've got to go there. So that's what I want to leave with everybody, these kind of challenges in innovation and invention and the role I see the federal government playing in both.
Great. Well, thank all three of you. At this point, we want to open it up to Q&A. We have microphones on both sides of the stage here, so we would ask you to step up and dive right in. Great. Go ahead and introduce yourself as well.
Sure. I'm Scott Sklar. I run the Stellar Group here in Washington and work with many of the technologies discussed here. I want to build on the comments of Mr. Liu and Ms. Ferris today. We know these clean technologies reduce energy and increase reliability. We know they reduce emissions and sometimes reduce water use. We know they enhance homeland security. And we know they increase agricultural productivity and strengthen our defense. So we know that. But with new technology, and this is the question for the panel, what I see in working with all these technologies and all these clean tech companies that are innovation, that's what this panel's about, is they need validation. You just can't have a great idea, and that's what Trey's done so well with Verdant, but it was a long road to hoe to get that validation. And I want you to remember what I just said is we have these national labs at DOE, EPA, USDA, DOT, DOD, and they're very good. But they really are not very agile. You can't come in and walk in with a new idea and say, help validate it. They look at you and say, oh, we have this RFP process, or we have this initiative going on. And there's no portal. And what we really need, and I want your comments on this, is what I'm concluding, is to create some portals where these labs can work with these companies together, not tons of time or money, but the private sector investors and the end users that I represent need technology validation. They're not going to buy a kinetic turbine without somebody saying, you know, under the conditions they present in the water here, with the loads you have, with the end use you have, makes sense. So I'd be interested to just very briefly whether you think we really need to, you know, we have an administration that's very open in this, but can we stir the pot so it can be more valuable to the companies we're talking about and rev them a little more so they can aggregate markets and scale? Thank you.
Great. Who would like to take the first crack at that? Joyce?
I can take the first crack. I fully agree, and I think I use the word a lot, navigation, that both customers and companies need help navigating what's a fast-moving, emerging, a very exciting market, but there's navigation and validation. And the national labs are a really good example, but even across agencies, as customers, we've seen companies that have touched the national labs at a couple of the different DOE national labs, for instance, and they don't know it they don't know it amongst themselves, and DOE doesn't know it, and FEMP doesn't know it, and GSA doesn't know it, and Navy doesn't know it, and there just needs to, it's communications, and for a small emerging company to do the job of trying to connect the dots within the federal government is a bit daunting. So I fully agree that there needs to be some sort of centralized portal or some way for just to create more efficiencies. Just that in itself would be enormously powerful.
I would agree. This is a very important need, and there's really very little funding out there to support that. And when we have some very promising technologies, we have maybe some startup companies trying to get the next step of investment is very difficult until you have this validation. And so this is something that we're trying to get more support for. And we have put up some funds to do it ourselves, but very important national need, I agree.
Scott, you're right about our own struggles. So when we began our project, it was in 2002, and we look at getting a commercial license now, maybe 2011. So it's what, how many years is that? Almost 9, 10 years? When I talked to the Chinese how fast it would take to get our technology in their water, they said 6 months. Right. And so there you are, and we have, and you're right, we've been struggling to get the money to able to keep moving us forward. We've been able to do it, but it's been a long, arduous process. It's almost, well, nearly has ground our innovation to a halt. Right. So I look also at places like the UK, which have laid out pathways for marine power development with funding each step of the way once they hit these milestones. And so the British government has been tremendous in support of the technologies in our sector that are being developed there. But there is an example of what might be done here.
We'll move over to this side.
Thank you. I'm Ben Schwartz. I'm with Scuderi Group. We're a small research and development company in West Springfield, Massachusetts. We have developed a highly efficient, low-polluting internal combustion engine. This is 40 to 50% more efficient, 80% lower NOx emissions, a significant improvement. We will likely sign our first licensing agreements with major engine manufacturers this year. Now, I want to make clear we are not in competition with electric hybrids, because essentially this is a scalable technology. This is, you can put in a lawnmower up to a cruise liner, anything in between with a piston-driven engine. Now, my concern is that, and the Secretary and Mr. Calzanetti discussed national security and our position vis-a-vis, other global powers. My concern with the government's apparent headlong rush towards electric drivetrains is the rare earth metals and the minerals that upon which this technology depends come from highly unstable regions that, if we do move in that direction headlong, will then have leverage over us in the manner of the Middle East and other oil producers with petroleum products. And I'm wondering what the overall calculation on the part of government is for addressing that concern.
It's a good question. Anyone want to take that one?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to ask something that's irrelevant to your panelists, but perhaps the Undersecretary could address it.
Well, I'm not sure I can, to be frank, but I think you raise a good point. It's a little bit, yeah, I mean, if I go there, I don't, frankly, I'm not really ready to go there. That's a little bit in a different portfolio, I'm afraid.
Pardon me, I apologize.
No, that's okay, though, that's fine.
I might just add, I was in a meeting Wednesday with the U.S. Joint China Commission, and this was a topic of great interest, the fact that a lot of these metals are in China, and we're very vulnerable to that. So it's really an important topic, I think, of consideration.
I mean, I'm sure all know that somewhere around $3 trillion worth of minerals were discovered in Afghanistan. So how does the dependence upon that affect our involvement and duration there? Anyway, I'm sorry for the off-track comment.
That's okay, thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Mike Eckhart. I'm the president of the American Council on Renewable Energy here in Washington. We have about 600 organizational members. We're a 501c3. I want to reinforce the idea of urgency. Urgency. I think you're making the point here with this meeting about importance, and we agree. But on urgency, it's worse than we've talked about. I received a communication this morning from a person who was in the State Council of China, sharing the insight that the State Council of China passed an order this week, yesterday, ordering all Chinese companies to implement the going out strategy. It's the going out strategy. Resource companies shall continue to obtain natural resources around the world. Energy-intensive industries shall henceforth build their facilities in developing countries. They're exporting their emissions in order to get their energy intensity numbers down that they've committed to. Third, in the high-tech industries, they are ordered to not just ship around the world, they are directed to establish marketing and sales offices around the world so they have personal understanding of the market drivers and dynamics and public policy in the US and Europe. And lastly, and most worrisome, in the clean energy sector, they are directed now, and you will be shocked, they are directed to go out and acquire companies that have IP. The question of intellectual property rights will now be off the table. They are coming here to buy our companies. I can identify $21 billion that has been given to five companies: Yingli, Suntech, Trina, Goldwind, and one I can't think of. 5. 21 billion, I can give you the numbers. This is a serious strategy that's about to happen. Second, released today, oddly enough, 2 news points today, ACOR has just completed and printed this morning our survey of all the major tax equity investors in the United States. We actually called them all and found them by name, and I give you their names, they're in here. If the 1603 cash grant is not extended, our estimate is that the tax equity, the equity capital available for renewable energy projects in this country next year will be down to between $1.2 and $3 billion, down from $6 billion this year. The capital available in our market, if our current policy expires this year, will be cut in half and possibly by a factor of 5 if we don't act. The second piece of news, our competitors are acting. So I just wanted to share these 2 factoids with you, that there is a sense of extreme urgency here. I thank you for this meeting, but I wanted to share that news with you, so it's in all of our considerations. Thank you very much. And I certainly would welcome your comments.
Well, I think I can say safely on behalf of the administration, I mean, we share that urgency. The president's been aggressive in his proposals. You look at the significant amount of capital that was put on the table through the Recovery Act, and a lot of the focus of multiple agencies on these issues. Washington is, I know you get in trouble for stating the obvious here, but, it's a funny town when it comes to trying to get big things done. And, we've been working hard on a comprehensive energy policy to try and address some of these issues, to get certainty into the system for a very long time. And I can say that we'll continue to push because we think that's paramount. I mean, I hear that all the time with the companies I meet with, is that, what are the things that you could do to help us the most? And, there's certainly the issues that we talk about, the technical issues in terms of validation or venture capital, early stage money, commercialization. All those issues are out there, but the number one issue is we need predictability and we need certainty. Make a decision so we know what the market's going to look like, and then we'll get at it. So we certainly share that urgency and appreciate others speaking out with the same kind of, passion about the importance of getting some things done now. So,
Thank you for your work.
yes.
I could just add, again, I've been to China 2 times over the last 3 years, and they were very much interested in thin film technology, thin film photovoltaics. When I said I was from Toledo, it seemed like I could just be in a regular meeting, and people know about Toledo and thin film photovoltaics. You talk to mayors, and they have all this detailed information. They really are trying to move from crystalline silicon to get to next generation and to the 3rd generation PV. Very much interested in our intellectual property. I came back just saying, well, how can we work? What can we do to work together? Haven't come up with solutions, but it's something that it's on our mind every day. The other point is that it's obvious that the Chinese are going after our scientific and engineering experts. I visited one company in Shanghai. One person came from Applied Materials, the other one from NREL, and another one from the University of Minnesota, starting a company over there. We have a lot of, some of our grad students, postdocs out of our place are, getting offers in China. And one of our spinoff companies can't get local investment, but now in China, he's talking to people in China. It is very scary, and the urgency is there, and we really need to take action.
I had one quick thought to share, and thanks, Mike, for reminding me of this. In my travels through China, I found there's a book that everybody is reading in China, and one best way to describe it is that China has 1 billion Rowans. Now, if you don't know what a Rowan is, you need to read the book A Message to Garcia, written in 1898 about the Spanish-American War in Cuba. The American generals gave a package of materials to a young Lieutenant Rowan from Virginia who didn't speak Spanish, didn't know where to find the Cuban general Garcia, didn't even know where to begin. The book wasn't about the 4 weeks that took Lieutenant Rowan to find Garcia. It was about his attitude. He grabbed the materials and saluted and said, "I'll get the job done." And in 1898, the author of this book said, how many times have you turned to somebody to get the job done? Instead, what you hear is, what do I do? How do I do it? Where do I go? That kind of whining. In China, they're getting the job done. They're Rowans.
Did you want to add anything, Joyce?
No.
Okay, great. Right over here.
Thank you. My name is Carl Gawa. I'm the Executive Director of the Geothermal Energy Association. And first I want to thank Secretary Locke for his recent trade missions. It was interesting to see the collaboration with geothermal, especially in Indonesia, because it's a sort of a traditional market, very fast-growing market, where U.S. companies did $6 billion worth of export sales in the past, but then for about the past 8 or 9 years, that sort of fell apart. And so it was good to see the collaboration trying to help U.S. firms, because it is a competitive world out there in many different ways, and U.S. firms need that help. But also what's developing is not just the traditional geothermal markets, but we're seeing a lot of new technology. And one of the points Trey made I wanted to underscore, which is it's great to have the research support for new technologies and new ideas, but you then also need the policy support to make them happen in the marketplace. And for example, we did a program in May looking at the growing market around the world for geothermal technology, and people were saying, well, where's all this advanced geothermal technology happening? Isn't it years away? Well, it might be years away in the United States, but in Germany, they're doing it today. It was stunning to see they have over 150 geothermal projects. And let me tell you, Germany's not the ring of fire under development. They're all advanced technology projects. And when I was in Germany last year speaking at a conference, it was clear to me they're looking at new technology in these areas and saying, we are going to be the world leaders, not just by doing the research, but by developing these products here. And you need both together to make these things work. And before you comment on that, one note on strategic minerals. In the 70s and the 80s, there was a tremendous interest in geothermal areas, particularly in Southern California, because there are more minerals going through the geothermal power plant tubes in Southern California than you need for the entire market for lithium, for rare earths, and others. The problem is it's very tricky to get it out, but we've had no investment in recent years in new R&D to recover minerals from these fluids. They are probably have bigger mineral resource than an energy resource. And it's something I know the department, through the stimulus funding, has made the first new investments in. But it's an area which there was a great deal of interest. It fell apart for a number of years, and we're only beginning to see interest. But that could be one route, other than direct mining, to do rare earths, lithiums, and other points. But my main point was Trey's point about you need both. You need the R&D and the market mechanism. So as this initiative moves forward, I hope it looks at how do you do both effectively.
Great. Anybody want to comment on that?
No, yeah, here.
That's what I
A
was
lot of
saying.
heads nodding. Yeah. Yes, sir.
John, I'm Terry Boston with PJM Interconnection. My question's for you. We have the markets and we have the ability with the smart grid to go prices to devices ultimately. And the markets are developing nicely. We are the largest electricity market operator in the world. And I am a rowing, and I know the problem of deliverability. Electricity is not a source of energy. It's a common currency of all sources of energy, and we're having trouble making wire transfers of that common currency. The building of transmission is required for the renewables. We have 3,000 megawatts of wind attached to the PJM system. We have 3,000 in the queue, 3,000 under construction, and about 41,000 in the queue. The offshore wind and the potential for hydroelectric tidal power and current power is there, but we can't get the permits to get the lines built that we need to deliver that. And I can give you two examples. AEP built the last 765 line across the Allegheny Mountains. It took 14 and a half years to permit it through the Forest Service and 18 months to build. China built a 1,000 kV line in 13 months. North China Grid grew 22% quarter over quarter, first quarter last year. Could the administration kind of come together on the permitting? I have a permit across the Delaware River. The governors have approved the project, and I hear it takes 3 years to get the Park Service to give us a permit across existing right-of-way where there is an existing transmission line. Can the administration put together someone to help us get the lines built that will deliver these renewables into the load centers and marketplace? And that line goes into northern New Jersey and New York, so it's critical. And I did meet with Governor Christie, and the governors are ready to go, waiting on the federal permits.
It sounds like an action item.
Can you help me, please, John?
Yeah, I'm the Assistant Secretary of Commerce for EDA, and part of my work is to make sure we're channeling a lot of these ideas to the right folks to try and do this. I mean, I know that that's again, with the smart grid and just getting the delivery system, there are some complexities, and we add to it, and where we can knock down and make that a simpler, more streamlined process, I think we absolutely want to. And we'll certainly convey that and see if we can't get more action on it.
I remind you, George Washington threw a silver dollar across the Delaware River about this point, but a dollar would go a lot farther back then. So it's not a long distance. We need your help.
Well, it's part of Joyce's point that I think is incredibly relevant, and I think that's one of the things that the federal government can do that's not even a budget-busting initiative, and that's to get a more unified strategic alignment across agencies. In my world, I mean, I know that there's over 258 different economic development programs, but, you know, we're working to try and build a framework to connect them up, to get leverage, to make a more seamless system. The permitting structure, I think, is an area where, and this is just John Fernandez's opinion, you know, that's an area where I think there's ripe for opportunities to address these urgency issues and to make it a priority and get the right folks focused on it so that we're, you know, bringing down the transaction costs and expediting deployment of a lot of these new technologies and opportunities.
I can't resist just adding a comment about that 765 line. That was probably the Wyoming, the Cloverdale. Yeah, back around 1988, 89, I got involved with AEP in Columbus, and we were saying we have a good geographic information system technology to help, and they said, we don't care how the line goes, we just want to avoid any sensitive areas, any sensitive sites, any historical, anything like that, and we came up with a beautiful route for that line. But the politicians, I think the politicians lacked the will to follow through on that, and it took us so long to get that thing sited, and just want to point that out.
Everybody brisket bird.
Yeah.
Both sides of the aisle, they play a solid out game. They just sit there. And all of us are busting our butts trying to innovate. When we hear about innovation, we hear about people trying, but trying is nothing. Trying is just lip service. People are kicking their butts.
I'm Alla Weinstein. I'm co-founder and CEO of Principal Power, a Seattle startup, a rare breed these days. This is my second startup. The first one was something that Trey Taylor is doing in wave energy, and we managed to get through FERC, and we managed to create permits, and we managed to actually get through a lot of things. But I would like to make 3 points. That we can start technology development, but as was Joyce saying, nobody wants to invest in commercialization, and states basically don't have money. We are looking at the federal government to help us with commercialization. So a U.S. technology company had to go to Europe to do its commercialization because we couldn't find any money here. No, we didn't go to China, at least not yet. Second point, when we started doing a FERC permitting process, and I was told it will take us 5 years to get to permit, I didn't believe them. Guess what it did? It took 5 years to get there. When MMS came with their ruling for the floating offshore, or for renewable energy on the outer continental shelf, and now somebody put the schedule together and said it's going to take 7 years, I think we're going the wrong direction. No private equity investor, no any investor that you can imagine would put any money into project development and sit there, wait for 7 years before they can give it even a permit to install. So something has to be done. You go talk to MMS and say, we have no way to do it. We have the regulations and the rules. Well, somebody gave them the regulations and the rules. So if we can maybe amend those regulations and rules and be able to get into installations within 2 years, that would be a lot more practical. And it would be also competitive to the world. And the third point is we have all the manufacturing capabilities we need. Our company does floating offshore wind, another strange thing, because technology doesn't exist anywhere in the world. We're the only US technology that can compete on the world market. Yet we're finding ourselves fighting with other companies that are funded by their governments. And yet we have the capabilities, we have technological knowledge and the manufacturing. And in fact, there is one manufacturer sitting here, Oregon Iron Works, that would love to fabricate everything, but we're struggling to get through commercial points, advancements, permitting, anything else you want, and yet we hear, please export. Well, we can export, and we will export, but I don't think we're helping ourselves.
A lot of heads nodding. Yes, sir.
Good morning, John. I want to thank the panel for being here today. My name is Robert Wallace. I'm CEO of a company called Bith Energy, located in sunny downtown Baltimore. We work in the area of energy information systems and renewable energy systems. We built the energy information system for Governor O'Malley in our great state of Maryland that he uses to cut our consumption down by 15% by the year 2015. We also build solar and wind systems. My question to to you, John, and the panel is, and I think you're hearing this theme echoed this morning. We specialize in focusing on renewable energy systems for low-income neighborhoods, low-middle income, and emerging markets, like in Africa and Latin America. We built a hybrid renewable energy home in South Baltimore and ran into a great deal of challenges with local zoning and government restrictions. And my question to you first, John, on the federal level is, what can we do, what can the federal government do to help get those impediments out of our way? And then to the panel is, you all are at cutting-edge technologies. What are you advising your entrepreneurs to do who are running into these same impediments, I'm sure, in their jurisdictions? We've launched projects, hopefully, in Liberia, West Africa, and Brazil, and we can move real quickly with the government to get things done. But here in our own country, it's a challenge. So my question is, how would you respond to that?
Well, you know, I'll take a crack at it. And yeah, as a former mayor, you know, I'm certainly sensitive to the issues of federalism and what we can and can't do in regard to mandating things as specific as zoning laws at a local level. But I think what we can do and what we've done in other areas is that, you know, you create a system to put carrots and incentives for communities to take certain actions, and as part of that process, it would require some of those changes. You see that with Race to the Top, for example, in the education world, and there's other areas with the sustainable communities where we can create an environment to encourage those kinds of things, but the federal government can't mandate that as city council change their zoning laws. But I tell you, the thing that I see as well, that many mayors, though, across the country are being incredibly aggressive at leading the charge, making markets, and driving some of the change we're all interested in. So now we just need to have a better fit with a more vertical partnership between the states and local government and the federal government to expedite that. But
I guess that's one point that I didn't make in my opening comments, and this ties to some of the stimulus money that is going out right now. That I participated as a reviewer of the Retrofit Ramp-Up program, which is all about funding to cities and states, primarily around energy efficiency, some on-site renewables. And I think that is an enormous opportunity that, as an investor, what my comments to DOE on that is, okay, you guys have just started, you have made a first investment of $80 million being leveraged by another 5 times, which is the objective. What's your follow-on strategy, and how are you going, if you think of it, the way I think of it is it's a fund management strategy, and how are you going to facilitate best practices across these municipalities and cities, because the reinventing the wheel and learning everything the hard way in sequence is just, it's terrifying to see, and it's not a prudent use of capital if that's happening, and they're certainly aware of it and they're trying, but it's a huge task. But that's an example where the investment has already happened, and there's enormous opportunity to facilitate that, and I think that is a good example and can help in a way that's not just city by city.
And you mentioned, Joyce, that the capital is sitting on the side right now. Part of the reason is the uncertainty of the environment. If we can remove that uncertainty, that capital will flow and we will innovate.
I have to say, I started my career as a developer of waste-fired power plants 25 years ago, and I've been through pretty much every technology that's been spoken about, Heber geothermal projects in California, hydroelectric, and the risk, the development risk, and the single point that could stop an entire deal, including you know, a neighbor who doesn't want an interconnect, those risks are so enormous that as an investor, and my objective, as I said to begin with, is finding ways to get enormous amounts of institutional capital in to help drive this sector. But all the risks that have been talked about, I'm sort of remembering why our primary focus is focused on energy efficiency and retrofit in the built environment, partly because there are fewer of those risks. There's still enormous challenges. But hearing everybody, I'm remembering just exactly your point. It's huge. And capital, institutional capital does not want to wait 10 years for a single project to generate a couple megawatts.
Let me add to that and share with you a couple of observations, if I may. It's the permitting regulatory processes that slows it way down, and that's why you can't get the capital. In our project in New York, time and time again, we heard from field offices of different resource agencies that they needed to hear from higher-ups that it wasn't business as usual. Otherwise, everything just gets into the queue, and you get this bureaucratic inertia settling in. Now, on behalf of the bureaucrats, so to speak, they are under budget and overworked. And so that's part of the problem as well. And the only way we are able to get our permits yanked out sooner was by relying on our local congresswoman to send her staff in there and march in there, arms akimbo, to get our permits. Now, let me contrast that. Oh, and one more thing is, because of working in Canada, I found that the underlying principles there is collaborative. And the underlying principles in the U.S. are adversarial. And that's the other reason that you have a lot of these delays, is because you need the proper paperwork in place to avoid suits. Now, let me contrast that for a second, and forgive me, everybody. I'm teetering on being boorish, talking about China, but let me share a story with you about how things get done there. A village in western China had these pristine waters that were being clouded and polluted by an upstream mine. Now, the waters were a tourist attraction, and now the mine was ruining their water and their tourist attraction. So they go to Beijing to appeal, to do something about it. Beijing said it's a local problem, you handle it. So the villagers went back up to the mine and blew it up.
I like that. Thank you.
In the spirit of risk management, I'm not even going to comment. Let's see, we're back over here.
Hello, I'm Tony Clifford. I'm the CEO of Standard Solar. We're located in Rockville, Maryland. We're a developer and integrator of photovoltaic systems. In terms of where we are in the ecosystem, we're pretty well along now. We just signed an agreement with a major utility to deliver 300 megawatts of PV over the next 5 years. And one of the things I would just say at the front end is that we've consciously are designing all of these systems to be less than 25 megawatts apiece, and that's because we don't want to deal with the FERC. So that's one thing that we're doing. But this is my second go-round in photovoltaics. When I was just out of business school in 1975, I worked for SolarX Corporation, which was then the leading developer of photovoltaics in the world, an American company also headquartered in Rockville. Now it's BP Solar. Now, back in those days, the only game in town was pure silicon. It was Czochralski method, semiconductor grade silicon, and that's what we made solar cells out of. And in those days, they always talked about the promise of thin film that was going to take over in PV applications. There's been a lot of improvements in thin film, but as a developer and integrator, I'm still using crystalline silicon. And the reason I'm using it is because if I want third-party financing, I've got to use crystalline silicon. I can't get it for thin films yet. And when I look at this in an evolutionary sense, I see that the technology has gone from semiconductor grade to poly to lower levels of poly. But right now there are two companies that are working on metallurgical grade silicon. And if you know anything about silicon, it's dirt. It's only 98% pure. But there's a Chinese company and there's a German company that's working on this. And I'd like to ask Frank, is there anybody in the United States that's working on metallurgical grade silicon? Because I see that as the next evolutionary step in my business where I can drive costs down.
We're working, we have this collaboration, as mentioned, with Dow Corning, and they have Hemlock.
Right.
So they have polysilicon production.
I know
there.
they have poly, but
yeah. So that's yeah.
Because I think metallurgical. What I worry about is somebody comes up and there are two companies, Q-Cells in Germany and Canadian Solar, which is a misnomer. They're a Chinese company.
Yeah.
They are the only people that are selling products now with metallurgical grade silicate. They're less than 10% efficient, so they're not really a threat to crystalline right now, but I think that's an area. And I think overall, I'd like to see some government support of how you wring the cost out of the current process, because the cost of photovoltaics have dropped quite a bit, and the way we were able to get this very large contract was a combination of factors, but one of them was forward pricing and pushing down our component suppliers. But they can't do that forever without some assistance to wring out more cost.
All right. Great. We're going to run out of time here in a minute, so we'll do 2 more questions here. Yes, sir.
My name is Francis Salzo. I'm with PACE Global Energy Services. And first, thank you for your time and efforts on this policy. 2 comments. One is on the global competitive issue, a slightly different lens maybe on the discussion that's been happening, which is I had the opportunity earlier this week to meet with a delegation from South Korea, the Daegu Free Enterprise Zone. This is an effort where they've committed about $60 billion in capital to focus on clean energy technologies in Daegu, which I believe is the 2nd largest city in South Korea. And the thing that's striking to me about what they're trying to do that's a little bit different than what we've been talking about when it comes to the Chinese is they want to partner with the U.S. It's more about finding ways where they take their manufacturing prowess and some of our capabilities and bring these things together. They also want to attract some American firms over there. So it's what struck me in the conversation that we've been having to date is part of this is how do we create the framework to compete globally, but also how do we create the framework to collaborate globally, because I think there needs to be a mix between those 2 things. The other comment I wanted to make is actually have the opportunity to work with Tony Clifford on some projects. And one of the things that, as we all know, many of the states have taken the lead on renewable portfolio standards and creating the framework for these projects. But each of these states have their pluses and minuses in terms of how these projects actually get developed and contracted within that system. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Last couple of weeks, I've spent a lot of time answering 106 questions from the Delaware PSC about the Dover Sun Park project. And serendipity, I had an eye appointment yesterday, and the doctor told me, come back next week. Something's going on with your eyes. I just couldn't help thinking it's got to be that 106 questions. But anyways, she really told me, something's going on with your eyes. You've got to come back next week. But the point is, we had a 2-year competitive process for the Dover Sun Park. There's been a tremendous amount of analysis, and this is sort of to a point that's sort of been made about development and all the development risk. And here, at the end of the process, the governor was involved in a signing ceremony. The PSC has decided that they need to, second guess everything, right? And that's just sort of a shame. And to cut to the chase, I think there's a role for the federal government where it could convene a group of people from these different states and say, what works and what doesn't work within these markets? Because if they could start adopting best practices, you would see tremendous growth in these markets, I promise. Maryland's a great example. Right now, only 50% of the requirements being met by solar. The rest is being paid by a compliance fee. That's just a shame. The ratepayer is paying a fee. It was to get solar built, and they're paying the fee, and they're not getting solar. So the point is, there would be some value, I think, and the federal government could play this role of convening legislators, other stakeholders to say what works, what doesn't work within these markets, and let's all move towards a framework that works more effectively. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, I used to have perfect vision, too, until I went to law school and ended up having to get glasses. Yes, sir.
My name is Dan Kind. I'm with INRI, or Independent Natural Resources, Inc. I did get permission from my CEO over here to embarrass myself here, so I'm okay with this. I won't lose my job over it. I want to talk first about energy savings. I think everybody can use this. I long ago decided to quit wasting energy on figuring out if I was the smartest person in the room. In this room, it'd be really hard to figure out that you were there. Instead, I just like to be the best-looking one in the room, and I think I'm on solid ground with that one. If I don't get there, I go to the best-looking one in a wheelchair. If I lose out at that, I go home. But I want to talk about, our organization is in the same space, if you would, as Verdant. We do wave energy. We just got our permit from the Army Corps of Engineers for an offshore platform on a piece of property we've been renting for about 8 months. It's 25 feet underwater. The comment that a couple comments that I want to make with regard to the Commerce Department and what we're doing. If we want to take jobs away from China, it's got to be revolutionary, not evolutionary. It's got to be something new. When you're talking about billions of people over there with the cost of living that they've got, and our jobs here being what they are and what we have to pay our people here, it's got to be new. It cannot be a marginal improvement on an old technology. And that brings us to where we've come up against government funding. When you go to get government funding, we have not done it. We've bumped up against it a couple of times and said, I'd rather go find someone down the street, an accredited investor who will give us some money, because we are out there. We're doing something that isn't being done. When you go to the government, they want to know, have you got the engineering in place? Have you got somebody who can tell you this is why it's going to work, this is why it's going to work? If you're there, the Chinese would already have it or will have it very briefly. You got to be different. If your funding process requires traditional engineering to get any help, you've already lost the battle. That's my point.
Let me just reinforce what you said. Again, the looking for money from the private sector for technology development isn't going to happen. It's got to be government support for technology development. Once it's commercialized, then private equity gets involved in commercial projects, moving it forward. And so it's just the reality of the times.
Great.
We've raised over $12 million
Great. That's
from
great.
angel investors.
That's great. That's wonderful.
It's more, we'd still be asking for the first dollar, I think, if we went the other direction.
That's a great vote of confidence.
Well, it's a nice segue as well to the next panel that's going to be looking at and discussing the issues of international leadership and competitiveness. So again, let me thank the panelists for committing their time today. Thank all of you as well.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.